The eviction notice was waiting on my chair at my father-in-law's funeral. It lay between the folded memorial program and the black gloves I had removed before touching Henry Bennett's casket. My name was printed across the top in heavy legal letters. Beneath it, someone had written 72 hours in blue ink and underlined it twice. I read the first paragraph while the organist was still playing. Hawthorne House, the home I had restored room by room for 8 years, now belonged to the Bennett estate. I was occupying it without permission. I was required to remove my personal property by Monday at noon. My husband Noah stood 10 feet away accepting condolences as if he had not slept beside me the night before. His mother, Margaret, watched me from under the narrow brim of her black hat. She did not look surprised that I had found the notice. She looked disappointed that I had not begun crying. I folded the paper and slipped it into my handbag. When the last guest left the chapel, Margaret approached me with the careful dignity she used whenever cruelty needed an audience. "This is difficult for everyone," she said. "Please don't make it uglier than it already is." "You served me an eviction notice beside Henry's coffin." "The timing was not my choice." "Whose choice was it?" Noah stepped between us. He had removed his tie and the top button of his white shirt was open. For one dangerous second, he looked like the man I had married 16 years earlier, the man who once drove 4 hours through a snowstorm because I had called from a broken-down car. Then he placed his hand on my elbow, not with comfort, but control. "We'll discuss it at home," he murmured. Margaret's mouth tightened. Hawthorne House is not her home anymore. The house had belonged to Henry, that much was true. It stood on 6 acres above Lake Calder, with gray stone walls, a collapsed conservatory, and a roof that had leaked into the east bedrooms for nearly 20 years. When Henry's hands began to shake, he asked me to help save it. I was an architectural conservator. I knew how to repair lime plaster, read old building plans, and persuade exhausted houses to stand another century. I did not know how to repair a family that had decided I was disposable. For 8 years, I spent weekends at Hawthorne House. I negotiated grants, supervised apprentices, bought reclaimed slate with money from my own consultancy, and slept on a camp bed while contractors rebuilt the staircase. 3 years earlier, when Henry's Parkinson's disease made living alone unsafe, Noah and I moved into the finished West Wing. Margaret remained in her apartment in the city, visiting on Sundays and criticizing whatever I had restored since the week before. Henry called the house our shared project. Margaret called me hired help with delusions. After the burial, Noah refused to ride home with me. "Mom shouldn't be alone today," he said. "Your mother just evicted your wife. She is following Dad's will." "Have you seen the will?" He looked away too quickly. "The lawyer explained it." "Which lawyer?" But Margaret had already opened the passenger door of Noah's car. He gave me the weak, apologetic smile that had ended hundreds of arguments without resolving any of them. "Please, Julia, not here." He drove away with her. Rain began before I reached the lake. It darkened the road and shook the last yellow leaves from the sycamores. I kept the eviction notice on the seat beside me, reading one sentence at every red light. The document named a company called Bennett Residential Holdings as the new manager of Hawthorne House. I had never heard of it. The mailing address was a post office box in Noah's name. The first thing I saw when I turned through the stone gates was my blue suitcase standing in the rain. Then I saw the cardboard boxes. They formed 2 wet rows along the driveway. My clothes, project files, framed photographs, the copper kettle my mother gave me, and the ceramic bowl Henry bought at a village fair because he said the uneven glaze made it honest. Someone had wrapped my computer monitor in a bath towel. My wedding portrait leaned against a box marked kitchen. Rainwater ran down the glass between Noah's face and mine. I tried my key. It entered the front lock but would not turn. Through the narrow window beside the door, I could see fresh brass hardware and pale sawdust on the floor. Margaret had changed the locks before her husband was buried. I called Noah. He rejected the call. I called again. This time a message arrived. "Please go to a hotel tonight. We need space." Mom has authority from the estate. Don't force this. I stared through the glass at the entrance hall I had rebuilt from water-damaged boards. Henry's walking stick was still in the umbrella stand. A black ribbon from the funeral had been tied around its silver handle. Someone moved at the end of the corridor. "Noah!" I shouted. The figure disappeared. A moment later, the curtains in Henry's study closed. I stepped back and photographed everything: the new lock, the boxes, the text message, the company name on the notice. Anger made my hands steadier than grief had. My phone rang while I was covering the boxes with a plastic sheet from the garage. The caller identified herself as Celia Park. I knew the name. Henry had hired her 2 years earlier after refusing to use Margaret's family lawyer. "Mrs. Bennett, where are you?" she asked. "Outside Hawthorne House. Apparently, I no longer live here." There was a sharp silence. "Who told you that?" "My husband, my mother-in-law, and a notice from Bennett Residential Holdings. Do not sign anything. Do not surrender any keys, documents, or restoration records. And do not leave the county." "They already changed the locks," Celia exhaled slowly. "Then the condition has been triggered." "What condition?" "Henry left 2 sealed envelopes in my vault. The first was to be opened after his funeral. The second could only be opened if someone tried to remove you from Hawthorne House before the formal reading of his estate documents." Rain tapped against the phone. Behind the study curtains, a thin line of light appeared. "Mrs. Bennett," Celia said, "your eviction notice is not the end of this story. It is the key Henry expected someone to turn." I looked at my belongings sinking into wet cardboard and asked when she would open the second envelope. "Tomorrow morning," she replied. "And Julia, bring a witness. After we read what Henry wrote, your husband may stop pretending this is only about a house." The second envelope did not contain a fortune. It contained a name no one in the Bennett family had spoken for 51 years. At 9 the next morning, I sat in Celia Park's office beside my friend Tessa, who had arrived with coffee, a phone charger, and the expression of a woman prepared to commit a minor crime on my behalf. Across the table sat Noah and Margaret. Their lawyer, Grant Lowell, placed the eviction notice in front of him as if it were evidence of my bad character. Celia set 2 cream envelopes on the table. The first held Henry's will. It was shorter than I expected. His personal accounts went to Margaret. His watch collection went to Noah. Several donations were listed for the hospital and the local historical society. Household objects were divided in an attached memorandum. Hawthorne House was not mentioned. Margaret leaned back with a small, victorious breath. "As I explained yesterday, the real property falls to the family company." Celia looked at her. "No, it does not." She opened a red folder and removed a recorded deed, a trust agreement, and a letter from the county clerk. 18 months earlier, Henry had transferred Hawthorne House into the Hawthorne Education Trust. The transfer had been recorded. Celia had served as the independent attorney. A physician had evaluated Henry's decision-making capacity on the same day. I had not been present, and according to Celia, Henry had insisted that I not be told. I read the first page twice. The trust was to preserve the property as a training center for restoration trades, local history, and community arts. I was named temporary trustee for 5 years. I would receive a salary set by an independent board, but I could not sell the house to myself, mortgage it for personal use, or change the charitable purpose. Noah laughed once. It was a hard, unfamiliar sound. "Dad put my wife in charge of my family home?" "Your father put a qualified conservator in charge of a protected property," Celia replied. Grant pushed the document away. "Mr. Bennett was seriously ill. His illness affected movement, not judgment. The medical report is attached." Margaret turned toward me. "How long were you working on him?" "I knew nothing about this." "You expect us to believe that?" Tessa placed her coffee down. Julia expected her husband not to throw her belongings into the rain, so clearly her expectations need work. Celia lifted one hand before Margaret could respond. The trust has a private family beneficiary in addition to its public purpose, she said. That is why Henry created the second envelope. She broke the seal. Inside was a single handwritten page and a small brass key taped to an index card. Celia read aloud. If Julia is being removed from Hawthorne House, then Margaret and Noah have chosen possession over truth. Open the blue room. Find Eleanor Grace Bennett. Do not let them erase her twice. Noah's chair scraped the floor. Who is Eleanor? I asked. Margaret's face had changed. Until that moment, she had been angry. Now she was afraid. A dead child, she said. Celia studied her. Henry believed she was alive. Henry confused old memories near the end. He paid a licensed investigator for 3 years. Noah looked from his mother to the letter. Mom? Margaret gathered her handbag. This meeting is over. Grant whispered something to her, but she stood anyway. Before leaving, she pointed at me. If you enter that house, I will have you arrested. Celia slid a copy of the recorded trust across the table. As trustee, Julia has both authority and a duty to inspect trust property. Your company never owned Hawthorne House. The notice you served has no legal foundation. Margaret walked out. Noah followed her after one last look at me. Not apologetic this time, but calculating. The blue room was not blue. At least, not anymore. It occupied the northeast corner of the second floor, behind a door disguised as part of the linen room paneling. During restoration, I had found the outline of an old doorway beneath layers of wallpaper. Henry told me it led to a service closet and asked me to leave it sealed. Celia arranged for a locksmith and a representative of the trust to meet us at the house. Margaret had gone. The locks she installed the previous day were replaced again, this time legally. My wet boxes remained outside, but Tessa photographed each one before helping me carry them into the conservatory. The brass key opened the hidden panel. Behind it was a nursery frozen in another decade. Faded blue stars covered the walls. A wooden crib stood beneath the window. Dust lay thick over a rocking horse, a narrow wardrobe, and shelves of children's books. The air smelled of cedar, plaster, and something sweet that had long since vanished. On the wall hung a photograph of Henry as a young man. Beside him stood a dark-haired woman holding a baby. Someone had scratched the woman's face with a sharp object, but Henry's handwritten label remained on the back. Rose, Henry, and our Eleanor. Summer, 1973. Noah was born in 1978. Celia unlocked a cedar chest. It contained baby clothes, unopened birthday cards, and dozens of return letters addressed to Eleanor at different foster homes and adoption agencies. Every envelope bore Henry's handwriting. Some had been stamped unknown. Others had never been mailed. At the bottom was a binder prepared by the investigator. The first pages traced a young woman named Rose Calder, Henry's first wife. Their daughter, Eleanor Grace, had disappeared from local records after the marriage ended. Later pages listed possible adopted names, schools, and addresses. One page was missing. It had been cut out recently. The paper dust was still pale along the metal rings. Tessa searched the floor while I opened the wardrobe. Inside, behind a row of tiny dresses, I found a loose strip of wallpaper. The plaster beneath it had been hollowed out to hide a narrow tin box. The box held 2 documents. The first was Eleanor's original birth certificate naming Henry Bennett as her father. The second was a letter signed by Margaret 6 months before she married Henry. I read the first sentence, then sat down on the nursery floor. Rose, it began, if you want the adoption payment, you will leave before Henry returns, and you will never contact this family again. The letter did not prove where Eleanor was. It proved why Henry had lost her. Then Celia's phone rang. She listened without speaking, walked to the window, and asked the caller to repeat an address. When she turned back, her face was pale. The investigator found Eleanor 3 months ago, she said. She now calls herself Nora Ellis, and according to the final report, someone from this house visited her last week. I looked at the clean cut in the binder and understood that Margaret had not changed my locks, only to take a building. She had been searching for the same woman Henry wanted me to protect. By the time I found Eleanor Bennett, my husband had already visited her and told her I was dangerous. She lived 2 hours north of Lake Calder in a yellow house behind a public school. Her name was Nora Ellis. She was 52, taught music to children between the ages of 9 and 12, and had Henry's gray eyes. Celia advised me not to arrive unannounced. She called first, explained the trust, and asked whether Nora would meet us in a neutral place. Nora chose a bakery near the school and arrived carrying a canvas folder against her chest. She did not sit. "Which one of you is Julia?" I raised my hand slightly. Her eyes moved over my face. "You don't look like the photograph." "What photograph?" She opened the folder and placed a printed picture on the table. It showed me leaving a restaurant with Henry, my arm linked through his. The image had been cropped so closely that Noah, walking on Henry's other side, was gone. On the back, someone had written, "She convinced him to change everything." "Who gave you this?" Celia asked. "A man who said he was my half-brother. Noah Bennett." The word half-brother seemed to hurt her. She finally sat. Noah had visited 6 days before Henry's funeral. He told Nora that Henry had become confused, that I had isolated him from the family, and that I was creating false documents to take Hawthorne House. He warned her that I might offer money in exchange for supporting the trust. He also asked whether Henry had sent her anything. "Did he threaten you?" I asked. "No, he was very gentle. That made it worse." I knew exactly what she meant. Noah's anger was brief and obvious. His gentleness could last for weeks. It arrived with tea, lowered voices, and questions about whether I was overtired. When I challenged him, he never said I was wrong. He said he was worried about the way I remembered things. Nora studied the photograph again. "Were you having an affair with my father?" The question shocked a laugh out of me. I covered my mouth. "I'm sorry, no. Henry was 78 when that picture was taken. We had just left his neurologist. He needed help with the curb." Nora did not smile. "He was still my father." "Yes," I said, "and I'm sorry you had to ask." I told her about the blue room, the letters, the trust, and Margaret's eviction notice. Celia showed her the recorded documents. Nora listened without interrupting. When I described the nursery, she pressed 2 fingers to the hollow at the base of her throat. "My adoptive parents told me my birth father never wanted me," she said. "After they died, I searched for him. Margaret answered 1 letter. She said Henry had built a new family and contact would destroy his health." "When was that?" 21 years ago. Henry had not been ill 21 years ago. Nora reached into her folder and removed a worn paperback. It was Pauline Boss's Ambiguous Loss, Learning to Live with Unresolved Grief. A counselor gave it to her after she spent years mourning a father who was physically alive but kept psychologically unreachable. "The book helped me understand why there was no clean ending," she said. "Every birthday, I decided he was dead to me. Every birthday, I searched his name." She opened the book. Inside was an envelope with Henry's handwriting. "For Nora, when she is ready." It had arrived by registered mail 3 weeks before his death. She had not opened it because she believed it was another attempt by someone in the family to control her. Celia checked the seal and nodded. Nora slid a finger beneath it. Henry's letter was 6 pages long. He did not excuse himself. He wrote that he had accepted Margaret's story because it allowed him to believe Eleanor was safe and wanted no contact. By the time he understood the deception, shame made him slow, and Margaret made access difficult. He described hiring investigators, finding Nora, and creating the trust. He asked for no forgiveness. The final paragraph was about me. "Julia does not know your name," Henry wrote. "That is deliberate. She has cared for the house and for me without asking what she would receive. If Margaret or Noah discovers the trust, they will accuse Julia of manipulating me. They may create evidence. Believe documents verified by people outside this family, not stories told inside it. Nora passed the letter to Celia. I don't want his money, she said. The trust is not a personal inheritance in the ordinary sense, Celia explained. You have a role in appointing the future board, and the trust can fund educational programs for your family. But the house cannot simply be divided and sold. Good. I spent half my life being treated like a disputed piece of property. She looked at me. What do you want? Yesterday, I wanted my clothes out of the rain. Today, I want to know what Noah and Margaret were looking for in the blue room. Nora turned the last page of Henry's letter toward us. At the bottom, he had written a series of numbers. Celia recognized them as dates. 3 matched large withdrawals from Henry's investment account. 1 matched the day he was admitted to hospital after a medication error. The last was 2 weeks in the future. That can't be right, I said. Nora unfolded a smaller note tucked behind the final page. If I die before November 14th, ask who benefits from closing the Restoration Trust on that date. November 14th was the coming Friday. We returned to Hawthorne House before sunset. Nora came with us but refused to enter until I opened the door. She stood in the entrance hall staring at Henry's walking stick, then touched the silver handle with one finger. The blue room had been searched again. The cedar chest was open. Letters covered the floor. The tin box was gone, along with Margaret's letter and the birth certificate. On the nursery wall, someone had removed the old photograph, leaving a clean rectangle in the dust. The trust representative called the police. While we waited, I noticed a muddy footprint below the window. It bore the narrow, zigzag pattern of Noah's new walking shoes. I had teased him about them a month earlier because he wore them with business trousers. I photographed the print. My phone showed 9 missed calls from Noah and 1 voice message. Julia, please call me before you do something irreversible. Dad hid things because he was ashamed. Mom is terrified. We can solve this privately, but if you keep listening to Celia, people are going to believe you took advantage of him. I saved the message. Then headlights swept across the nursery ceiling. 2 police cars entered the drive, followed by Noah's silver SUV. He stepped out before the officers and pointed toward my car. That's hers, he said. If she hasn't moved them yet, the missing bonds will be in the spare wheel compartment. The officers searched my trunk while I stood beneath the window of the room Henry had hidden for half a century. They lifted the floor panel. Under my spare tire lay a sealed packet of antique bearer bonds worth nearly $300,000, and on top of them was the key to Henry's private safe. The bonds in my trunk were not meant to make me rich. They were meant to make every truthful thing I said sound like the excuse of a thief. The officers photographed the packet while Noah watched with the sorrowful patience of a husband pretending his wife had destroyed herself. Detective Lena Ortiz asked who had access to my car. My husband has a second key. Noah shook his head. She changed the locks on everything after Dad died. Your mother changed the locks on the house, I said. I changed nothing. Ortiz separated us. She took my phone, copied Noah's message, and photographed the muddy shoe print in the nursery. The bonds remained sealed inside their transparent estate sleeve. Henry's initials were written across the label, but I had never seen the packet before. Why did your husband know where to find it? She asked. That question kept me out of handcuffs. Noah claimed Margaret saw me near Henry's safe. Margaret claimed she overheard me discussing the bonds with Celia. Neither explained the spare wheel compartment. At midnight, Noah called from an unknown number. Resign from the trust, he said. Return Dad's property, and Mom will tell the police this was a misunderstanding. You planted those bonds. Listen to yourself. You sound paranoid. How did you know exactly where they were? He paused. Because Mom saw you hide them. Yesterday she said she saw me near the safe. You are confused, Julia. This week has been traumatic. There it was again, concern used as an eraser. I put the call on speaker. Tessa wrote every word while Nora gripped Henry's letter. If I resign, I asked, what happens Friday? Noah breathed into the silence. I don't know what you mean. Then ask your mother. He hung up. The next morning, Celia assembled a forensic accountant, a title examiner, and an elder law attorney representing the trust rather than me. I handed them every record, device, and key I owned. Mara began with Henry's investment statements. The dates in his letter matched 6 transfers totaling $640,000. Each transfer moved through Bennett Residential Holdings, then into consulting companies linked to Noah's college friend, Peter Vale. Descriptions such as accessibility renovation and medical coordination made the withdrawals appear related to Henry's care. Most of the invoices were false. One charged $18,000 for a wheelchair ramp a charity had funded. Another billed Henry for nursing that was never provided. Mara placed the invoices in a row. This is not a sudden inheritance dispute, she said. It is an extraction system. She referenced the National Elder Mistreatment Study led by Ron Asierno, which treated financial exploitation as a form of elder mistreatment rather than a harmless private conflict. Families often hide the conduct inside ordinary caregiving, loans, and shared accounts. Henry's papers showed the same camouflage. Every transfer had a respectable label and a family signature. The electronic locks gave us our first direct link to the bonds. Margaret deleted the user history, but the installation company retained a log. Noah's code opened the side door at 4:12. At 4:26, a marina camera captured him behind my car while workers carried out my boxes. He had opportunity, a key, and 23 minutes alone. The packet produced something better. Beneath the estate sleeve, investigators found adhesive fibers from the blue painter's tape used to label my boxes. A partial print on the inner plastic matched Noah. None matched me. Ortiz called to say the investigation had changed direction. That should have made me feel safe. Instead, it made Noah dangerous. Margaret filed an emergency petition to remove me as trustee before the laboratory report could be finalized. Her affidavit described me as an unrelated daughter-in-law who had isolated a vulnerable man, concealed a trust, stolen estate property, and recruited an alleged daughter whose identity had not been proven. An emergency hearing was scheduled for Monday morning. Nora almost left that night. This is what she wanted, she said. My presence makes you look like part of a scheme. Your absence lets her erase you again. You don't know me. No, but Henry wanted you to have a choice. You cannot choose if Margaret frightens you out of the room. She walked to the nursery window. Below us, the lake had turned black under the evening sky. My adoptive mother kept every document, she said. There may be records Margaret doesn't know about. Nora drove home and returned before dawn with 2 storage boxes. Inside were adoption papers, letters from Rose, and a receipt for $5,000 paid by Margaret through a law firm that no longer existed. Rose's final letter to the adoption agency stated that Henry had abandoned them. A later note, never mailed, said Margaret promised that Henry would be told Eleanor had died if Rose refused the private adoption. The records established Margaret's pattern of controlling access to Henry, information, and family identity. Celia found the missing piece in Henry's medical chart. During Henry's last admission, a nurse recorded that he repeatedly asked for his attorney. Margaret called him confused. The next morning, Henry told a social worker he feared his signature was being used. On Sunday evening, Celia received Margaret's exhibits for court. There were photographs of me helping Henry sign restoration permits, copies of checks he reimbursed to my consultancy, and a statement from Noah describing my obsession with owning Hawthorne House. The final exhibit was a notarized agreement dated 4 months earlier. It stated that I had accepted $50,000 to resign from any future role in the Hawthorne Education Trust. The signature looked exactly like mine. The notary seal belonged to Grant Lowell's office. A bank record showed $50,000 entering an account under my name. I had never seen the agreement. I had never opened that account. Mara traced the account number while Celia called the bank's fraud department. 5 minutes later, Mara turned her laptop toward me. The account had been opened online using my social security number, a photograph of my driver's license, and an email address I did not recognize. The recovery phone number belonged to Noah, but the money was gone, transferred on Friday to a title company under the description Purchase Deposit, Hawthorne House. Margaret was not merely trying to remove me as trustee. Before the court could decide who controlled the house, she and Noah were preparing to sell it. Margaret entered court dressed like a widow. Noah entered dressed like a witness. Both of them had forgotten that Henry had spent his final year preparing to testify without being alive. The hearing took place in a small probate courtroom. Ava Brooks represented the trust. Celia waited to testify. I sat at the other table as temporary trustee and accused thief, with Nora behind me. Margaret's lawyer began with emotion. Grant described a close family divided by an ambitious daughter-in-law. He said I exploited Henry's illness and filled his final months with fear. The trust, he argued, was the product of confusion. Then he displayed the photograph of me linking arms with Henry outside the restaurant. Mrs. Bennett controlled his transportation, his appointments, and access to his home, Grant said. The judge looked at Ava. Is that disputed? The photograph is cropped, Your Honor. The uncropped version shows Mr. Noah Bennett holding his father's other arm. Ava placed the full image on the screen. Noah appeared beside us, smiling into the camera. It was a small lie, but exposing it changed the temperature of the room. Grant called Margaret first. She testified that Henry's memory deteriorated, that he sometimes confused dates, and that I became possessive of Hawthorne House. She wept when describing the hidden nursery. My husband carried shame from a tragedy in his youth, she said. Julia discovered it and used it to turn him against us. Did Eleanor die? Ava asked on cross-examination. Margaret dabbed her eyes. That was what Henry believed for many years. Because you told him? Because Rose disappeared. Did you pay Rose $5,000 before the adoption? Grant objected. The judge allowed the question only as it related to Margaret's credibility. Margaret stared at Nora. I helped a desperate young woman begin again. Did you tell Henry his daughter was dead? I protected my marriage. For the first time, Nora made a sound. Not a word, just one breath pulled too sharply into her lungs. Celia testified that Henry contacted her without me, met her privately 6 times, and reviewed 3 versions of the trust. He rejected giving me ownership, selected an independent board, and required annual audits. Was Julia present when he signed? Ava asked. No. Did she know the trust existed? No. Did Mr. Bennett understand the nature and consequence of the transfer? Completely. Dr. Samir Patel, a geriatric psychiatrist, described the capacity evaluation. Henry knew the property, its value, his family relationships, and the effect of the trust. Parkinson's disease had slowed his speech and movement. It had not removed his ability to decide. During the recess, Tessa handed me a page of notes. She had been reading Susan Forward and Donna Fraser's Toxic In-Laws while waiting. She had summarized one of its central lessons in her own words. When a spouse continually treats a parent's demands as more legitimate than a partner's safety, the in-law problem is also a marriage problem. I folded the note and placed it in my pocket. For years, I blamed Margaret for every boundary Noah refused to defend. The truth was simpler and harder. He had not failed to stand between us. He had chosen her side and asked me to call it peace. After the recess, Mara Chen followed the money. She showed the court the false care invoices, the transfers through Bennett Residential Holdings, and the $50,000 account opened in my name. The recovery number connected the account to Noah. The funds then moved to Calder Title Services as a purchase deposit. Grant argued that financial irregularities did not prove the trust was valid. No, Mara replied. They show why someone wanted the trustee removed before an audit. Noah took the stand against Grant's advice. He said he created the account at my request after I became worried Margaret might challenge the trust. He claimed the resignation agreement was part of a private settlement I later regretted. According to him, I had become emotionally unstable under the strain of Henry's illness and was now rewriting our conversations. Ava placed Noah's late-night call summary before him. You offered to make the bond accusation disappear if Julia resigned, correct? I offered to help my wife. How did you know where police would find the bonds? My mother saw Julia hide them. From where? The upstairs hall. Ava displayed the floor plan. From the upstairs hall, the driveway was blocked by the conservatory roof. Margaret could not have seen my trunk. Then Detective Ortiz entered with the preliminary fingerprint report and locksmith logs. The judge allowed limited testimony because the evidence directly concerned whether I should remain trustee. Ortiz explained that my prints were not on the inner packet. Noah's partial print was. His code opened Hawthorne House, and marina footage placed him beside my car. Noah's gentleness disappeared. I moved the car, he snapped. My fingerprints could be anywhere. Inside a sealed estate sleeve? Ava asked. He looked at Grant. Grant looked down. Nora was the final witness. She did not dramatize her childhood. She identified her birth certificate, adoption record, Rose's letters, and Henry's registered letter. A preliminary kinship test matched her to Henry's surviving first cousin. She told the judge she did not want to own Hawthorne House. Then why are you here? Grant asked. Because my father spent 51 years believing silence was proof that I rejected him. I will not let this family use my silence as proof again. The judge ruled from the bench. The trust would remain in effect. I would remain temporary trustee under court supervision. No property could be transferred. The false account and planted bonds were referred for criminal investigation, and Margaret and Noah had to surrender all access. For the first time since the funeral, I could breathe without feeling a hand around my throat. Margaret stood before the clerk finished reading the order. You are protecting a house that no longer belongs to the trust, she said. Grant grabbed her sleeve. Margaret, stop. She pulled free and looked directly at me. The sale closed Friday afternoon. The deed was submitted before this hearing began. Whatever Henry promised you is now someone else's property. The judge ordered everyone to remain while the title examiner checked the county system. At 11:43, a new deed appeared in the electronic record. Hawthorne House had been sold for $900,000, less than half its appraised value, to Calder Ridge Renewal, a company formed 11 days earlier. Its registered agent shared an address with Peter Vale, Noah's college friend. The deed carried Henry Bennett's signature. It was dated 9 days after his death. A dead man had signed away Hawthorne House 9 days after his funeral, and the buyer expected us to accept the impossible because it had been recorded in an official ledger. For several seconds, nobody in the courtroom spoke. Then Judge Mercer leaned toward the title examiner and asked the only question that mattered. Can the transfer be stopped? The recording can be challenged, the examiner said, but if the buyer moves the property again, borrows against it, or begins demolition, recovery becomes much harder. The judge issued an emergency order before noon. No sale, loan, renovation, or transfer involving Hawthorne House could proceed until the deed was authenticated. The court also ordered Calder Ridge Renewal to identify everyone behind the company. Margaret called it harassment. Noah said there had to be a clerical error. Peter Vale did not answer his phone. By evening, the first lie had already cracked. The notary named on the deed was Helen Ward, a retired clerk who had moved to Arizona 3 years earlier. She appeared by video the next morning, held up her current identification, and stared at the document on the screen. That is my old seal, she said, but I did not notarize this. I have never met Noah Bennett, Margaret Bennett, or Peter Vale. The forged signature was more sophisticated. But when an examiner placed it beside a restoration permit Henry had signed 14 months earlier, every tremor and microscopic break appeared in exactly the same place. Real signatures resemble one another. They do not repeat like photocopies. Someone had lifted Henry's signature from the scan permit and placed it on the deed. The county upload records led to an account created with Peter's email address. The payment card belonged to Calder Ridge. The internet address came from Noah's office building, and the original file contained metadata from a laptop registered to Margaret's charitable foundation. Peter surrendered first. His lawyer delivered messages Noah had believed were deleted. Noah promised Peter a percentage of the resale and said his mother would keep Julia buried in court until the building is stripped. A developer planned to divide the land into luxury lots. The sale was merely a paper bridge carrying the house out of the trust before anyone could stop it. There was also an audio message from Margaret. "Once the deed is recorded, sentiment is irrelevant," she said. "A courthouse respects paper, not widows." She had forgotten that forged paper is still a confession. Noah disappeared before the final hearing. Police found him 6 hours later in a roadside motel under Peter's middle name, carrying $38,000 and the original notary seal. When they brought him into court, he looked smaller than the man who had watched my belongings soak in the rain. His expensive jacket was wrinkled. His confidence had vanished. Yet when his eyes found mine, he still tried to make me responsible for what he had done. "You pushed us," he whispered. "If you had just left the house alone." "I did leave it alone," I said. "You were the one who tried to sell it after its owner died." He lowered his head, but not from shame. Noah was grieving the collapse of a plan, not the damage he had caused. The deed was voided. Frozen accounts returned most of Henry's money, and Peter's insurer covered another portion. Criminal charges followed for forgery, fraud, conspiracy, and financial exploitation. Those cases would take longer. Truth may enter a room in one afternoon, but the law inventories every footprint before it leaves. Margaret was offered a chance to speak before the court finalized control of the trust. She stood with both hands gripping the table and looked toward Nora, not me. "Your mother wanted money," she said. "She would have destroyed this family." Nora did not flinch. "You destroyed it to stop her from entering it." For the first time, Margaret had no reply. The judge confirmed me as trustee, but Hawthorne House could never become my private asset. I could protect its purpose, but I could not sell it for myself. That limitation felt like freedom. Margaret had confused possession with love. Henry's gift required the opposite, stewardship without ownership. I filed for divorce the following Monday. Noah sent 3 letters from detention. He blamed his mother, then fear, then said he loved me. I answered only through my attorney. 16 years deserved the honesty he had refused to give them. Nora and I did not become sisters overnight. We argued about budgets and whether the nursery should be preserved. But week by week, the house stopped being the place where her absence had been hidden. We made the blue room into a small music studio. The east wing became classrooms for restoration apprentices. The dining room hosted free legal workshops for older residents and caregivers facing financial coercion. Nora joined the board. Above the desk, we displayed Henry laughing with sawdust on his sleeves. On opening morning, rain struck the windows just as it had on the day of the funeral. I stood inside the restored entrance while students gathered on the porch. For one sharp moment, I remembered my suitcases lying open on the pavement and Margaret's voice telling me I no longer belonged. Then Nora handed me a small envelope she had found beneath the false bottom of Henry's desk. Inside was one final note. "Julia, if this reaches you, then they probably fought for the walls and forgot why walls are built. A home is not inherited by the loudest person at the funeral. It belongs to the people who keep its doors open. Do that, and I will have chosen well." I read it twice. Then I gave the note to Nora, turned the brass lock, and opened both front doors. The students entered carrying toolboxes, sheet music, notebooks, and questions. Their voices filled the hall Margaret had tried to empty. No one asked which woman had won the house, because by then the house was no longer a prize in a family war. It had become proof that inheritance is not what the dead leave behind. It is what the living refuse to let betrayal destroy. Sources used for the psychological and elder financial abuse background of this fictional story. Pauline Boss, Ambiguous Loss, Learning to Live with Unresolved Grief. Harvard University Press, 1999. Rana Cherno, Melba A. Hernandez Tejada, Wendy Muzzy, and Kenneth Steve. Prevalence and Correlates of Emotional, Physical, Sexual, and Financial Abuse and Potential Neglect in the United States, the National Elder Mistreatment Study. American Journal of Public Health, Volume 100, Number 2, 2010, pages 292 to 297. DOI 10.2105/AJPH.2009.163089. Susan Forward and Donna Fraser, Toxic In-Laws, Loving Strategies for Protecting Your Marriage. HarperCollins, 2001. The characters and events in this narrative are fictional,